Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Memory Core. My name is Adam, and today I want to take a moment to talk about the pieces I painted for ReaperCon both this year and last year, and what I learned and what I took away from them. So, I'm also recovering from COVID. You may hear me cough here and there. I'm going to do my best to not let that run away from me. Last year was my first time entering a painting competition, and I actually got some really great feedback and understood a bit more about what I was doing wrong, what I was doing right, what I need to improve on. And I learned even more this year. So in 2023, I took these two pieces and managed to win silvers with each, which was pretty cool. I mean, it was my first time going to a painting competition, and I got to get some feedback on how to improve to get to the next level. The first one I did was this Scout, and you guys probably recognize this from one of our videos. You saw me painting it, and I really like this miniature, and I like a lot of the old school miniatures. I know you guys have heard me talk about them, and I just think they really are fantastic. I think they're underrated, and they're not appreciated. And that's not to say that everything that Rael Partha and Iron Wind has done has been fantastic, but I think we are missing out on some really amazing things. Now, this miniature was done in the late 80s. It was the oldest miniature at the competition. I mean, it was over 30 years old, and this one is actually lead. You can see at one point it took a tumble, and it dented its butt. But I tried to do some new things with this guy, and I ended up taking this to ReaperCon because I thought, yeah, this looks pretty cool. I want to see what the judges think. I ended up doing warm shadows over cold highlights to try and give kind of an otherworldly feel. And I think in some instances I got the shapes correct. For example, the torso was kind of a odd-shaped cylinder with two curves. I've got, my shadows are where my shadows should be. But at the same time, there were some shapes I didn't get correct. And let me see if I can find my toothpick here. So one of the feedbacks I got was, for example, on the head is a sphere. And what ended up happening is that because the idea was I was going to include gradients to try and give more visual interest. And in the end, I ended up including my shadow tone where there shouldn't be. And that is a problem, Your sphere is supposed to have a sort of central highlight where the sun is coming in or where your light source is, and then mid-tone, and then the bottom half or the half away from it, from this light source, should be in shadow. I didn't do that. My other issue was that I did kind of a set of, just highlighting everything, which is typical what you see with, say, Warhammer heavy metal style, but it's not really how light works. So you can have a highlighted edge on the bottom of a panel, but at the same time, that highlight is not going to be as strong as the one closer to the light source. And so little stuff like that, drag this piece down. So brush control, color choice, non-metallic metal, all that stuff was great. But because I made some mistakes and did things which were technically incorrect, drag this piece down to silver. My other issue was the basing, and this is kind of a consistent problem I've had. It's something I got to continue working on. I'm going to go over that more later. I thought about, maybe going back and fixing this. I kind of want to do a bit of a snow base, and I did learn a snow technique at ReaperCon this year at one of the classes I took. But I'm not sure if I want to implement on this guy or just leave him be. It's not a gaming piece. It's more of a display piece. And, just not sure. Like, do I leave it be and leave it as an example of my progress, or do I continue to improve it? In fact, one of the things I learned in this piece was for the green, I used phthalocyanine green. I had gotten this sample bottle from Reaper with an order. It was unlabeled, had no idea what it was until I was able to put it together. And then I later bought this one from Golden just to have it. So phthalo green is this otherworldly, quite cool green that is great for shadows. You can use it to darken other colors. You can use it to shade reds or even oranges. You can shade brighter greens, but it's also very transparent. And I think that's something that we don't really appreciate in the painting community sometimes, is that, these are both pure pigments. Sometimes it's not how much pigment's in a bottle. It's formulation. So some paints may be more opaque because they add whites and blacks. I heard a rumor that some painting companies actually add marble dust to try and act as opacifiers, although I wasn't quite sure the validity of that and how to follow up with that. Googling doesn't really provide any answers. And granted, like the new Army Painter Fanatics are supposed to be quite good. The Army Painter War paints were absolute dog shit. Like there's no pigment in those. But, for these guys, you can use as much paint as you want, but you can see in this example and then how Golden does their labeling and their opacity, this is really quite transparent. And so what that meant is when painting the Oscout, if I made a mistake, I'd have to completely fix it, go back with white and then go back over it again. But I just was really careful and got some cool color choices, but that was also a learning experience. For this one, this Violin Bard, I really like this miniature. It's a very cool piece. Dark Sword Miniatures has a lot of really fantastic fantasy sculpts by a lot of people whose names you probably know if you've been painting miniatures for as long as I have. The issues I had with this piece was not so much the white, and the white was actually one of the things that were complemented. I kind of made things hard on myself by using a limited Zorn palette. Anders Zorn was I think, Swedish painter, and he was known for using a limited palette. The Romans also used this limited palette of a red, a black, a yellow, and a white. In my case, this was ivory black, titanium white, pyrrole red, and yellow ochre. Not yellow oxide, but actual yellow ochre. And I mixed all the colors together using those 4 paints. And, the fact that I was able to do that felt really fantastic. But I had some issues, again, that dragged me down from gold to silver. So it doesn't matter how great the white was, although I am quite proud of the white. There just were some issues. So, for example, my light source is coming here, and, it should be hidden. But at the same time, I didn't paint this area deep enough or dark enough. My shadow area here on the cape didn't quite match my light source. And again, that's one of those things, sometimes you just have to have someone tell you this stuff, like point it out to you. Thankfully it wasn't anything like, oh, I missed a mold line. But, if you don't get in focus. If you don't get your light source correct, you're not going to achieve those wins. One of the other things that was pointed out to me were those little bits and pieces that elevate a piece. So, for example, when you paint a lot of miniatures, especially for display, you want to pull the attention of the viewer up towards the face and upper chest area. That's convenient on this piece because you have the violin and the bow. But what I probably should have done, and what I was recommended to do for the next time I paint a piece like this, would be maybe include a little bit of a bright highlight right there in the violin as though it's catching light. But also, and really subtly, I highlighted the bow consistently across, which may be technically correct. That's what light will do. But if I had brought the highlights towards here, maybe this darkened a little bit, it'd be one of those little subtle things that brings the eye towards the face. So little stuff like that, I was like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. And I just needed someone to tell me. The other issue, again, basing. Dark Sword does a lot of these little mini, almost gaming piece bases, which is fine. But if you're doing a display piece, you kind of need something a little bit more. That being said, stuff I was worried about and stressed about, such as a non-metallic metal on the bracelets, I know you guys maybe can't appreciate that very well from here. But it turns out, hey, they liked that. They didn't have any issue with that, which is funny because the things you stress out about maybe are the things that people like. But yeah, so, basing continues to be an issue. So this year, I brought these 2 pieces. This first one is a Tom Meyer sculpt that was produced by Ralph Partha Legacy. And when I saw this last year with the Kickstarter that Ralph Partha Legacy did, I thought, man, this is awesome. I got to have this piece. This thing is sick. And it's really cool. It's originally part of a dual diorama. So originally it included another figure and they were crossing swords, but I just bought this guy separately. And, stuff I was worried about, the skin, the non-metallic metal, all that kind of stuff, the judges love. They were like, yeah, your skin's great. Your non-metallic metal is great. But your basing sucks. And as soon as I got to the show, I was like, what the heck was I thinking? This is crap. And part of it was because I was doing 2 pieces. I was just really pressed for time, and it ended up really hurting me. Some of the feedback I did get was, not so much, shading and highlighting, but for the non-metallic metal, although it's a bronze color, in this case, there should be some white highlights just for that light catch. And yeah, I mean, that's what metals do. That can be sometimes difficult in trying to figure out what's going on. I didn't want to overdo it, but I had only taken these light sources on the bronze up to like an ivory tone. So later next week, I have another painting competition I want to enter. And so it's local to me. I need to find a way to get this off the base without damaging it. And I ended up getting some bases from Green Stuff World and Noble Knight Games. I think this one is the size that is going to work best. And although it's not the black color that I prefer, it was what was available. And I think this will work quite well. I just got to figure out what I'm going to do in terms of the terrain. I'm also going to add some white highlights and maybe punch up the hair a little bit. But this guy, he wasn't that far from gold. And it turns, because you don't have to be perfect for gold, but it turns out, man, my basing sucks. And it's a continuous weak spot and something I just have to work on. And if I'd done that right, I would have taken home 2 golds this year from ReaperCon. But I still really like this miniature. I am really happy with how the skin turned out, which is a difficult part, especially because so much of him is skin. But he's just wicked cool as a mini, and I'm glad I got to paint him up. So I even did the skin tone. I mixed it myself from chestnut brown and then added an ivory and a little bit of Reaper's non-metallic metal gold highlight. It's just this really soft yellow that seems to work very, very well for giving it that impression that it's in yellow sunlight, whatever you are highlighting. So yeah, definitely a lot of pros, but again, like the basing dragged me down and just, I look at it now and I'm like, man, okay, so I highlighted the rocks correctly, whatever. If I don't get that basing correct, it's gonna get you every time. For this, the Highlander won gold. And so this Ironwind Metals Highlander, this is the second sculpt that they did, and I think this sculpt is fantastic. It's a lot of pieces, and it went together very well using that green stuff trick that I shared, and some pinning just because of its size. But it's so poseable. I mean, the upper arms, lower arms, hand, the feet, lower legs, upper legs, the waist, the chest, and the head are all separate pieces. So it is almost like a model kit. But man, it just looks so good. And I know that they wanted to redo everything, the whole line for the BattleTech, but this is the guy. This one is also really important to me and personal to me because, hopefully you can see it, the tartan pattern is my school's tartan from when I was in Edinburgh. So this is the University of Edinburgh tartan. And so it felt great for me to be able to put that on a miniature and to be able to do something in freehand that looks pretty good. For this guy, I ended up doing a light side and a more obvious shadow side. And I did this by using the orange-brown Reaper Triad, which I know has a bit of oxide brown in there, at least I think it does. And then just using plain oxide brown on the back and using Payne's Gray to shade it, and then using Ghost White from Reaper to mix the highlights. And then on the front, I used the orange-brown Triad and then added the pale skin shadow for the highlights. It's got this pinkish orange yellowish mix to it that just works very, very well for highlights, that doesn't desaturate it and doesn't become chalky the way a lot of whites do. You know, a lot of whites, there's something about the titanium white pigment and the matte medium that just makes things granulated and chalky and difficult to work with. So that's why if I'm using a lot of white, for example, on the non-metallic metal, I'm often using Golden's Fluid Acrylics white because it's a gloss and it tends to be very smooth. In this case, in this guy, I really managed to dial in all the shapes. So for example, one of the big things, like again with the Oscout, you know, messing up my shapes. For example, here on the arm, you have the light source coming in and you just know like that should be in shadow, that bottom half. And then the upper half, it's brighter. I also was darker down here at the base and then worked brighter up to the top. But getting all those shapes dialed in took me quite a long time, but it was worth it because I think it looks really fantastic. It really pops. I also managed to include in occlusion shadow. So where your two light sources meet, you can see it usually pretty well in the kneecaps here and the lower legs. You have a more of a brown tone and then suddenly like a very dark line that was done in Payne's gray where those shapes, where those light sources meet. And then again, it becomes very bright as it comes to the light side. Little stuff like that, I put a lot of time and effort into to make sure I got it right. And thankfully, you know, it paid off. One of the things that was critiqued on the Oscout was that there was nothing on that base, because it just was a simple gaming base, to give the impression of scale. You know, otherwise it's like, is it a man in a suit? Is it a man-sized robot? And so I wanted to make sure I went on my way to include markers on this that gave the impression of size. So I have a little infantryman painted in the style of the Fox's Teeth cover. Love the cover of that book. Jim Holloway, I love that aesthetic, and I kind of wish Battletech did a little bit more to keep that and maybe update that. But that felt great to do a little tribute to that guy. And then I had a tree in the back. But one of my issues, one of the critiques I got on this was not so much on the miniature, the painting, you know, get colors, brush control, freehand, all that stuff, great. But because these bases were too small, I overdid it and maybe went a little bit too big. I just cut a piece of wood from Michael's. But Bryce Kokenauer and Angela Imrie, who often are at ReaperCon and teach classes, you know, gave me some advice and actually let me borrow an airbrush very briefly and some pigment powder, one to shade the feet, because plain pigment powder, you lose those details, but also to darken as I get away from the miniature so that, again, it draws the eye to the two pieces and the main miniature to give an idea of where the eye should be looking. So, again, you know, I won gold, but it wasn't perfect, and nothing's going to really be perfect. But you do need that feedback to understand what's going on and what you're doing. And that's what's great about those painting competitions. And, you know, although, you know, this guy didn't win gold, I'm definitely proud of him. And I'm going to try and fix that for the competition coming up in a week. But I'm really happy that this guy won gold because it's very personal to me and I put an awful lot of work into it. So yeah, that is kind of my progression. And I already have some ideas for next year and what I want to do. I don't know if I'm going to use an older miniature again because the idea of what I want to do is going to be mostly cutting some things up. And I feel a little bit nervous about doing that. But, you know, we'll see. I've learned so much at these shows and at the classes I've taken. And one of the pieces I'm working on is this Axeman that I've had for 30 years. And I'm doing some cool things with shading with a different color to provide, you know, a chromaticism for contrast rather than just darkening something. So shadow side, light side. Got a lot more work to put into this guy, but I'm glad I'll be finally getting this guy painted because this has been very special to me. So yeah, thank you for hanging out. Thank you for watching the video. Thank you for letting me ramble on about something that maybe you guys don't care about at all. But if you stuck around, thank you. And I hope to be doing more videos. I hope to be doing some more stuff with Dan. And I hope to be seeing you guys soon.